Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents KYLE SERAPHIN?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in KYLE SERAPHIN. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called KYLE SERAPHIN brought it to the public. And we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the KYLE SERAPHIN Show.
KYLE SERAPHIN, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent KYLE SERAPHIN.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the KYLE SERAPHIN Show. Today is Monday. It is May the 6th, and we are rolling live right now on rumble.com/KYLE SERAPHIN. You guys can join us over there in the live chat, which is already going, and I want to say thanks to Eric Jason and to Rose for marshaling the troops. Appreciate you guys. And if you guys want to join us over on rumble.com/KYLE SERAPHIN, you can give us a thumbs up, you can give us a like, you can give us a follow if you're so inclined, and then you can also subscribe to the channel over there. Once you hit follow, you got to do it on a browser. That means you can do it on your phone. You can do it on your PC. You can also subscribe to the channel. It's like $5 a month, 22 cents a show. Pretty good deal. Then you can complain about the music all you want. That's the rules. If you want to complain about the music that we run before the show starts, you got to be a subscriber. Otherwise, you get no vote. And I'm leaving Eric in charge of deciding about that. Folks, we got an interesting show today. We're going to be talking about all kinds of interesting stuff. Want to get into a little bit about the Palestinian protests. I think I want to do kind of a retrospective. We're at a good point now, far enough away that we can talk about where it's going, where it's been. I went up and pulled articles going back to October of 2023. We'll kind of see how the media coverage has progressed, because I think that's worth looking at. We're going to talk about birth control, which has been a topic that is something we talk about in our family quite a bit for some reason. There's a woman named Angeles Clark, met her in person, and she's an interesting character. She's been doing a lot of coverage of this. There was also some coverage in today's Loop from Catholic Vote. So I want to do some discussions about hormonal birth control and sort of the way that has moved thinking, and maybe the way that it's actually moved our society. And then, like so many other controls the left loves, it kind of has some racist roots. That's disturbing, isn't it? Anyhow, we're going to get into that. Going to talk a little bit about the commies. Going to talk about the last thing I want to get into is this DOJ issue, which Daily Signal, which is Heritage Foundation, did a nice coverage of. And this woman, Kristen Clark, who ended up being sort of the overall authority that has gone after the protesters that are protesting abortion in this country. The Civil Rights Division of the DOJ has a woman sitting in front of it who apparently lied to Congress. And I want to get into kind of the deeper aspect of what it actually tells us. Some inside baseball, maybe, as far as the commentary that you're not going to hear anywhere else. So make sure you guys are sticking around here. We're going to get started by first off thanking our sponsors. And particularly, I want to say thanks to Patriot Coolers at patriotcoolers.com. That's where you go to the website, patriotcoolers.com, and the promo code KYLE, K-Y-L-E, promo code KYLE. And you can get yourself a customized tumbler like the one up here. This is Nicole's tumbler. She posted it over on True Social. Look how good that is. It's got the badge, the Suspendables badge. I wasn't sure about the sizing when I went on the website. That's the 32-ounce tumbler by the look of it. I've got two of those. I don't have it in that color. It looks awesome. And if you guys don't have your own, you can customize them. We have a couple of different logos. We've got the Last Line Substack AR with the plume coming out of it. You've got the badge. You got the Betsy Ross option. You got the upside down American flag with the Suspendables S. All different things you can choose under the customize section. All you got to do is go to any of the tumblers, the hard-sided drink cups, coffee cups as well, and you click customize. You scroll down a little bit to Suspendables. You'll be able to add something like this, and you'll see how cool they look. Promo code KYLE, K-Y-L-E, lets them know that we sent you at patriotcoolers.com. Big thanks to them. They've been supporting us for well over a year now. It's awesome to have a good sponsor that wants to just stick with you and knows what you're about. And we said, hey, why don't you just take our logos and start putting them out there for people? Because that's what we want to do. All right, let's get started. let's get started. I don't have a ton of videos today. I don't have a ton of, you guys know what protesters look like. They're kind of smelly. They kind of have the same colors right now. They are all running in black and white and red and green, the sort of pro-Palestine colors. But this is the thing that I keep seeing. Why is it that it's the BLM Antifa Marxist agitators? They're the same people. They're not even hiding anymore. They don't even need to. In any case, I created a little meme today for you. If you guys want to see it, I'll throw it out on social media in a bit. But it does seem like all the pro-Palestinian agitators, the Hamas supporters, if you will, are the same exact idiots that were tearing this country up in 2020. They're the same ones that were starting fights with cops. They're the same ones that were charging barricades and trying to take over buildings. Today, they're taking over university campuses because that's where the fertile minds are, the ones that are easily susceptible to sort of commie ideas. But yeah, they're the same exact people. It used to be that they're going after the federal buildings because we had a lot of weakness in the federal system. Today, they're pro-federal, except they're kind of anti-Joe Biden. They're kind of all over the map, aren't they? They're a little bit confused. But they are the same people. And I've got a little video that comes out of the University of Utah that shows us that. Taylor Hanson and Tenet Media pushing that out earlier. So let's get into a first story here. I wanted to go back, a retrospective, if you will. This one is coming from KCUR, NPR, Kansas City. If you've ever spent any time listening to Kansas City, or if you ever spent any time listening to NPR, it doesn't matter where you are, actually, Kansas City or anywhere else, what you'll find is that apparently a huge percentage of the world are transgender. Everyone else is gay or bisexual. And all of the biggest, most important woke causes are constantly being highlighted. And they're always trying to share with you the perspective from a fair and balanced position of hard leftism. You got to love NPR, the fact that we all have to pay for it. This article dates back to October 15th, and it is entitled, Palestinians in Kansas City call for peace. They worry over loved ones in Gaza. Quote, we are terrified. Now, I used to live in Kansas City. It's one of the many places I live. I lived outside of Kansas City, actually. I don't remember running into a Palestinian American population there, but apparently there are hundreds of them. It's not that big of a place. There were roughly 1 million people living in Kansas City and the surrounding areas when I lived there. And what I found out is that hundreds of years earlier, they were, at least at the turn of the century, there were 1 million people living there as well. It's kind of a constant population area. The statement here is that local residents from the local Palestinian community, as I said, I've never seen it, but it must exist because they said so on NPR, just like they said there's trannies in Kenya. They gathered on Saturday, obviously last year, in support for Palestine and to demand an end of the Israeli occupation. Now, when I say hard left, coming from NPR, I mean that these people are going to do it in words and in phrases. There are 5 paragraphs that are written before they actually say what caused all of this. And that's worth noting because this was only a week after the invasion that took place on October the 7th of last year. They're talking about this person. I don't know if it's a man or a woman, someone called Faras El Hussein, a Palestinian American living in Kansas City. They always can find one. Every phone call we get, every text message, every time our phone rings with an alarm, we're terrified that it's going to be the call from our families overseas telling us that our family no longer exists. Can we just take 1 second and listen to that? Every single time we get a text or a phone call, whatever, the phone goes off, we're afraid it's going to be our family telling us our family doesn't exist. Does that make any sense? It must have sounded good when they wrote it up. It's kind of like the little thing from Pirates of the Caribbean. I remember Johnny Depp where they talk about, like no one's ever lived to tell the tale. And he's like, then where do the stories come from, I wonder? Same kind of idea. In any case, this person supposedly was born in the Gaza Strip, has already lost family members. That's sad. Like there's obviously sadness in this. Lost a second cousin. It's a woman, I guess, lost her husband and their 4 children. I don't know if that's the second cousin's husband or her husband. Blah, blah, blah. Here's where it gets down to it. 6 paragraphs deep, it finally says the rally comes 1 week after Hamas militants killed more than 1,300 people in Israel. Oh yeah, and 27 American citizens, prompting the Israeli government to declare war against Hamas again. And in those days, since then, 2,200 Palestinian civilians have been killed and thousands more displaced. How many militants were killed? It doesn't have that number. Why does it only tell us that there were civilian deaths? And how did NPR validate that 1 week after the fact? It didn't. It didn't validate those numbers. That's what propaganda looks like. Propaganda looks like verbiage that is emotionally triggering and doesn't have to have any factual basis behind it. Israel cut off food, water, electricity, fuel, and medicine from the region, and yet those people are still alive today, and we still see people that are agitating on their behalf today in the United States. So that's also not true. The other interesting thing is that all of the Muslim countries, the Muslim majority, the Arab nations around so-called Palestine or the Gaza Strip area, they don't want these people coming in either, because they are a force of dissent within their own nations. Nick Freitas, who's a member of Congress, a former Green Beret, did a really good video. It's about 6 months old right now. You guys can go find this on YouTube. There's one that's called, I think it's called the Y Minutes. But if you want to go and just look for him, just type in Palestine and Nick Freitas, you'll find great YouTube videos. It's about 5 or 6 minutes long, so I didn't want to play it today, mostly because I don't want to crib off his notes. But he does this great retrospective talking about the people living in that area and the sort of chaotic problems that they've caused going back for, north of 3,000 years. It goes all the way back into the biblical Old Testament times that these people were an issue. There's a reason why there is a wall being erected right now between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. They've increased their border security while the American continent, or while the American country here has given up patrolling our southern border and are allowing people to come in by the millions. You've got people in Egypt going like, I don't think we want this force coming into our area. So it's quite interesting that these folks are chanting this. Like I said, for me, the big coverage was two things. Number one, handmade signs. You're seeing it on the screen right now. These are people that have made them with markers and crayons and sketched them out with pencils. So they've got that. And the second piece of it is that it took 6 paragraphs, only a week later, 6 paragraphs for they actually to talk about the underlying cause of what caused this this Israeli invasion and this Israeli declaration of war. It was like, 27 Americans were killed and also north of 1,300 Israelis killed. It turns out that Israel doesn't have to necessarily be that proportionate, particularly because these people have been electing terrorists to run their country or their little strip of the area, that region within the country, for, north of a decade and a half. All right. So the second article that I saw here that I thought was quite interesting comes from LA Times. This is coming from November 4th of 2023. And you'll see again, still the handmade signs. They didn't get the machine rolling yet to start printing this stuff out. Hundreds rally at the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Isn't it interesting that these people are rallying in favor of a ceasefire when the people they're supporting are the ones that kicked it off? Doesn't that seem weird? And then the photos here, which are photos from about the same time. It looks like they were taken by the Los Angeles Times. These are people who look like they actually might be related to people in Palestine. The more that this quote unquote protest movement goes on, the less and less we see people from Arab nations being involved. And the more we see like obnoxious, socialist, Marxist white chicks with liberal arts degrees or comparative literature degrees. This one says hundreds of people protested outside of the Israeli consulate in West Los Angeles, condemning Israel's invasion of the Gaza Strip. And they got it right up front here. They were like, okay, we got to acknowledge this. In retaliation for Hamas's brutal attack last month on its neighbor. Yeah, is it really a neighbor? Haven't we kind of decided that Israel sort of is just like completely encapsulates this place? It's just a rogue faction within Israel, waving Palestinian flags and chanting ceasefire now. Is like, look, anybody who's ever been in a fight knows you can start the fight, but once the other party gets involved, it's now 2 to tango, especially when there are some grievances and, 27 dead Americans and, north of 1,000 dead Israelis. They get a chance to do their own hit back. You don't get to punch somebody in the face and then say, hey, I give up. You can only do that in America in a law enforcement setting where you can literally shoot at cops, drop your gun, put your hands on your head, and they will take you into custody and not kill you there. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And when it comes to this kind of social movement, it's pretty wild that these folks decided that they're going to bother people on Wilshire Boulevard in the middle of the day and marching across the 405 freeway. This is going back to November of last year again. We saw all these protests. Now, this is fun, because this actually escalates. The third paragraph here, although orderly and peaceful, the marchers spread out all over the streets, leaving one lane open for cars to patch. Eventually, they took over the entire boulevard. Is that really orderly and peaceful? It might be peaceful that they are not causing violence. But there's nothing orderly about stopping traffic when you have no ability or no permit to make that safe for anybody. And nobody knows what's coming. When you stop traffic, the assumption is something bad can happen. They stopped traffic in Israel, by the way, on October 7th. They shut down traffic, and then they went door to windshield to windshield and murdered people. There's plenty of video of it. So it's very interesting that the exact same technique is referred to as orderly and peaceful. Again, propaganda writers are going to write propaganda. That's the nature of how these people work. And of course, they say that this protest comes amid the escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas militants, who, once again, they have to acknowledge, launched a surprise offensive from neighboring Gaza on southern Israel October 7th. At least the Los Angeles Times is doing the lip service. I think their readership audience probably has a fair number of Israel supporting pro-Jewish and or just a Jewish reading base. Even though they tend to lean towards the political left in that area, they at least have to pay a little bit of lip service to truth and honesty in this case. Quite interesting. Now we're going to keep going. We're going to move a little bit more forward. And as we get there, we get to the Intercept. Now, the Intercept is left to hard left, depending on what they're talking about. And they're always going to kind of side in interesting fact, which I don't think they're wrong. And sort of they have this long form discussion on the issues with the ADL, of which there are plenty. But this article is coming from February of this year. So we've gone forward like 2.5 months. How the ADL's anti-Palestinian advocacy has helped shape the U.S. terror laws. Now, of course, the backdrop and the photos of it are all showing people that are protesting against, this is at Hunter College where they're showing this, but they're protesting in favor of whatever's going on in the Palestinian movement, the pro-Palestine movement. But they're talking about something that I think is really important. They're talking about the free speech application or implications that happen when we have people that don't agree with us in this country. That's the brilliance of the American experiment. You're allowed to say things that we hate, no matter how awful they are, right up until the point when you are no longer saying and you are now doing things that are dangerous. I would say that line starts getting crossed as you come in and start blocking traffic in Los Angeles. But hear this out. Last October, as protests against Israel's war on Gaza swept across U.S. campuses, two prominent pro-Israel groups wrote to their nearly 200 universities and college administrators, urging them to investigate their students for possibly violating federal laws by promoting pro-Hamas, anti-Israel messaging. We obviously had the House pass something similar about this sort of anti-Semitism bill. The Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, and the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law suggested that members check out Students for Justice in Palestine, the largest Palestinian solidarity campus organization in the country, which may have been violating a law which prohibits people from providing what they call material support, a broad category that includes money as well as services and other assistance to U.S. designated terror groups. ADL said we can't sit by while these guys are doing this, potentially materially supporting. Look, when you're a non-government organization like the ADL and you have a specific political agenda, you're allowed to lobby and to make noise about things that are potentially problematic. But the idea of material support, which we talked about a little bit here, I want to hit it to you guys again. There's a nuance here that is so important, and very few people are ever going to grasp it, mostly because most people have never been part of counterterrorism investigations. Material support of terrorism is the go-to charge that you get people locked up on federal terrorist charges. We rarely have overt terrorist acts. It's almost always material support of terrorism. You remember we talked about the guy, the kid, the 18-year-old, who wanted to have a flaming sword and hit his dad with a lead pipe and take his guns and shoot up a church in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That was material support of ISIS. That's what they got him on. That was the actual charge. It's not bad idea theater. They literally have to see that you provide material support, which is almost always money. The problem comes in America where money is equated with free speech. Because of Citizens United, we have Supreme Court precedent that states that your money that you give is your speech, right up until you give it to an organization that is dedicated to, or that is designated rather, as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO, by the United States State Department. So that only works for foreign entities at this point. The State Department is outbound focused. They are our mechanism of diplomacy. The State Department declares who is an FTO, and the FTOs cannot receive money, and therefore your support of them in this country does not constitute free speech, at least as is currently stated. That's problematic. We have a fundamental inconsistency in our legal standing right now, where you cannot give money or you can give money and it is your speech, but you can't give it in instances where it's supporting a group that the state of the United States, when the federal government has declared to be a problematic actor overseas. We don't really vote on that stuff, guys. We don't have much say in how the State Department operates. The State Department is an executive agency, but it's also part of that sort of administrative state, that deep state mechanism where people have been there for many, many years. And I'll tell you something that surprised me the most. The first time I went into the United States State Department, we talked the other day about the IC badge, the Intelligence Community Badge. It's this generic looking badge. It doesn't have any markings on it. It's got a seal of the United States, and it's bluish, and you can roll into Langley, you can roll into NSA, you can roll into NRO, you can go into all these different intelligence community organizations. The State Department is actually one of them that you can get in. I only know that because I did. I used my IC badge and went in. The one thing that blew my mind there, and I would have never known this had I not gone in there, is almost every single region and every single country has what's called a desk. There's a China desk. There's a Russia desk. There's a Cuba desk. There's all these little areas, and they focus on policy and what is happening in those areas in order to, sort of influence statecraft that the executive puts out. And theoretically, they're supposed to advise, and then the president makes a decision, sends that information back, and then they go and implement whatever the president says. That's the way it's supposed to work. What's wild is every single desk is populated almost entirely. Now, there may be some desks that I didn't see, but the ones that I saw were populated almost entirely by people that were born in the country that they're advocating for the United States on behalf of. So what does that mean? That means that ethnically Chinese people born in China, are running the China desk for the State Department. Ukrainians are running the Ukrainian desk. Russians are running the Russia desk. People in the Balkans are dealing with the Balkans. People, part of that makes sense. Like, they're the most expert, they're the most interested, they have the family members and the connections. But also, don't they have the biggest conflict of interest there? Isn't that weird? It's weird to me. And I don't know if there's a Palestine desk. I didn't actually see one there. But I can guarantee you that the people that are advocating in the various Middle Eastern areas are also, generally speaking, going to be from those countries. And we're at this very weird problem with material support. Because if America believes in free speech and we believe that money is speech, then why can you not give money to support organizations that maybe I hate? That's the real problem on the political right. We are burdened by principle. We're burdened by the concept that our ideas are supposed to make sense with each other. I like to give the example of my father-in-law, who has this really goofy idea about guns. He doesn't trust the government in theory, although apparently now he does. He's more and more becoming a statist, which is like the opposite of his old ideas. I guess because the state is now implementing more and more leftist ideas. But my father-in-law used to always tell me that he didn't like the idea that private ownership of guns, but he also didn't trust the police. That's really hard to justify in your mind. If you don't believe in the police, which is that kinetic organization that can enforce and use violence on the population to get the population to obey government rules, but you also don't trust the government, why on earth would you believe that only the police, only the government would be the ones who can own guns? They seem like they're at odds with each other, and they're comfortably living in that world on the political left. There are many of their ideas that don't seem to make sense to each other. Like, they champion victim groups. And who has been more victimized, at least in the last, let's say 100 years, who's been more victimized than the Jewish people who were massacred by the Germans? And then strangely, it's just not in fashion to talk about that anymore. It's now fashionable to talk about this new group. And so they're talking about Palestinians. The thing about it is that if you're on the political right, you have to be able to champion people speaking things that you hate. You have to be able to say that people, and this is an old liberal idea, by the way. This is something that even the ACLU used to defend. You used to be able to say, it's okay that you don't agree with me. I want our ideas to be at odds, not our bodies. And that's less and less the case, which is why we're getting more and more movement towards political violence. That's why more and more we're seeing things like this. This is the MayDay Protests in Seattle. MayDay, also known as International Workers' Day. International Workers' Day is synonymous with Marxists and communists. It goes all the way back to, I think, like the 1890s was the first version of it, where they were pushing this sort of Bolshevik idea that they were pushing that there should be this workers of the world unite. I want to touch on this in 1 second. First, I want to throw out a little read for our sponsor, and this one is going to go to Mad Hat Jerky. This is a good time to think about snacks. You know what those people need, those hungry protesters? They need snacks. They need high-quality snacks, and they're not getting it. They're complaining. They want meals to be brought to them. You guys can get your own at Mad Hat Jerky because you're a capitalist who believes in spending your money on where you want. MadHatJerky.com/Kyle. 20% off if you use the promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E. 20% off. That's a pretty good amount. You guys can figure out what it is that you like. My favorites, I've said it before, but I like the original. It's actually very good. When you have an original that really rocks, that's helpful. Check out the original. Check out the black truffle, and check out the roasted garlic. All three of those are my top 3 faves. It depends on if you want a little bit more rich or you want a little bit more spice. MattHatJerky.com, Matt with 2 T's, hat with 1 T, jerky spelled out, .com/Kyle, and get yourself squared away. Once you figure out what you like, you can get a subscription on there and have it regularly sent so you don't have to think about it. That's the way I operate. I have to set up a subscription on mine. I've just decided what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do like 12-ounce bags. So that's the way I work. Okay, I want to get into this MayDay. Why in the world are the commies, because that's what they are, the MayDay protesters? And I remember these going back to when I was in high school. They used to have these big riots every May 1st, right? In Seattle, of all places. Same story in Portland. It's kind of spilled into that space, that Pacific Northwestern protest zone, which I had to go deal with when I was in the FBI. Even the analysts that were working for the FBI, they said, this is Portland and we love our activists. It's like, do you? It was like a 6'7", like 290-pound, effeminate, gayish guy telling me that they love their activists in Portland. And I'm reading this story. This story comes from, is this from local news? This is from a local Fox affiliate in Seattle. Okay, this goes all the way to just a couple of days ago. So we've now gone from October of last year right down to May. MayDay protests in Seattle include pro-Palestinian supporters. Here's where it's going to get really funny for me. Like I said, your free speech line is right up until the point when you stop being peaceful. And we heard about this during the BLM stuff, right? They had to claim that it was mostly peaceful. Fiery, but mostly peaceful. Does that remember? Like you ring some bells back there. Look at this opening line here. Seattle. Workers and activists around the world marked MayDay with largely peaceful protests Wednesday over rising prices and calls for greater labor rights. Pro-Palestinian sentiments were also on display. Why? What does the Palestinian sentiment have to do with workers of the world unite? It's almost none. I don't know that there's great industry there. It doesn't seem like this is an autonomous little region that is governed by a terrorist organization, which has put billionaires into high-rise apartments in Qatar. The founders of Hamas and all the big names there have left and absconded with literally billions with a B dollars to go live fancy lives in safe and lovely places. Meanwhile, the so-called plight of the Palestinians continues as they struggle to have like basic ends meet. Why are those people being lionized by the commies? And why are we already going to the largely peaceful protests? Remember, it was mostly peaceful before. I would suggest to you that if this is where Fox 13 landed in Seattle, and I'm sure they live on the political left, Fox or otherwise, if it's largely peaceful now instead of mostly peaceful, that's where we're going to live. And this doesn't ever, so they go on in this article and they talk about how there have been campuses from Columbia, which we've shown you, UCLA, which we've shown you, University of Texas at Austin, that's down the street from me. We didn't show you any of that, but there's the same. They carry out people, they drag them out like toddlers. Portland State University in Oregon, that's no surprise. University of Washington in Seattle, hundreds of people being taken into custody. People get taken into custody when they break the law. And you know how tolerant they are in most of these places, especially in Seattle and Portland. So if they're picking people up, there's 2 possibilities. One, local law enforcement has decided that this is too far and they're not going to do 2020 again, which was incredibly disruptive to businesses. You know, I don't know if downtown Portland, maybe somebody will send me a picture, but when I was there, it didn't look like downtown Portland could recover. It wasn't quite as bad as Beirut in the 80s, but it was bad. Everything was boarded up. There were signs on the windows that were begging the mostly or largely peaceful protesters to not destroy and ransack. They said, we're on your side. Just let us sell Patagonia stuff. That was the Patagonia store. We're on your side. Please don't loot the Apple store again. These people were moving, sort of, they took their rage out wherever it was because it wasn't about rage and it wasn't about moving that needle. And what's really interesting to me is I don't think it's about workers. What conditions do American workers not have that people in the 1919 MayDay riots in Cleveland, what conditions do they not have met? The interesting thing is a lot of these movements, the political left continues to be what they call a progressive movement. And progressives don't know when to stop. That's really the thing. Once the goal is achieved, they keep going onward. First generation feminism, second generation, third wave. It continues to go on to the point where now, quote unquote, feminists are arguing for men with penises to be in women's locker rooms. That's how far gone you are. When you don't have a hard barrier because your ideology is so malleable and you're so able to handle that cognitive dissonance of things not making sense, eventually you get to crazy town. And I would argue to you that all the workers' movements, the greater labor rights, we have the most safe conditions for workers in history to the point where it's actually so detrimental to businesses, it makes no sense. The only thing that doesn't exist is a universal basic income and a universal wage that is livable for every job. Not every job is supposed to be a living wage. When you're a 15 or a 16-year-old, the way that my first job was working at a Baskin-Robbins, you're not supposed to be able to support a family on it because you're 15 or 16. You're supposed to be living under someone else's roof. You're getting job skills. You're getting customer service experience. You get something of value in addition to just the wage. The wage is just sort of like the nominal requirement. You're actually working the same way that people used to do in apprenticeships. You're learning how business and human beings and people and adults that are not your family operate. Real simple. Straightforward. The claims that we don't have the safest work environment in history. We have OSHA on the federal level. We have state labor laws. We have state minimum wages. We have all of these requirements. We have health inspectors that come in. We have job site inspectors. We have building conditions inspectors. There are ways to shut down all of these things if they are not safe for the workers, which is why I would say that the workers' rights movement has moved on from its capability. It doesn't need to be there anymore, which is how they end up picking up all this garbage and why they end up supporting, other generally commie causes, which have nothing to do with them. There's nothing about Palestinians that has to do with workers' rights in the United States. Nothing. Zero. It doesn't stop these people. There's no cognitive dissonance. The marching goes on ever forward. And you get to the point where you have this story from Breitbart, which is just 2 days ago. It says the University of Chicago thinkers, like the University of Chicago has some of the most incredible minds in this country and maybe in the world. When you go there, you can feel how high the IQ is on that campus. And yet, anti-Israel encampment demands HIV tests, dental dams, and Plan B. These are the demands of the maniacs. What on earth does that have to do? What in the world does it have to do with what's going on in Palestine? And the fact of the matter is, it's nothing. Nothing whatsoever. An organizer involved in the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas encampment, obviously this is a right-leaning publication here, released a list of needs, supplies, and they included Plan B, HIV tests, Vaseline, and much, much more. I had to go look. I sort of know as a medic, I guess I've been around this, as someone who went through a health class in high school. I know what a dental dam is in my head. It's like a polymer sheet that is worn on the woman's genitals so that oral sex can happen without a fluid transfer. What the hell? And by the way, the weirdest thing from today's research this morning, as I was putting this together, the CDC actually has an entire website, including many graphics, which I have spared you on the visual channel, of how to apply a dental dam and how it works and how to create a dental dam if you only have a condom. You can actually cut the condom at the top and the bottom and flay it out and make like this rectangular, you cut down the slit, you have a rectangular little barrier. Yuck. Why is our government spending money on that? In a time when we are so safe that our government is telling people how they can have non-procreative oral sex in a way that sounds horrible. Sounds like you're going to get all kinds of gross stuff in your face. This is what they're demanding at this pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel camp. Because it's never about the thing. It just starts in one place and it moves forward. I see you guys in the chat calling out the Soros Foundation. Yes, the Open Society Foundation. Yeah, the money behind it is all disruptive. The interesting point to me is not that there's money behind it of people that are anti-American and generally speaking don't care about our conservative values, don't care about our constitutional values. The interesting thing to me is that there are children that are willing to participate in it. And where does that come from? Because that's the dark place that I want to go with this. One last little piece here. You'll remember the exact same situation happened under the George Floyd protests in 2020, the so-called Summer of Love. I found this. This is from a website called In Defense of Marxism, which is pretty funny. This is going back to June of 2020, right in the middle of the weird stuff. I was dealing with these people in Washington, D.C. when I was working for the Washington field office for the Bureau, and there was no good answer on the federal side, which is probably good. It's not really a federal issue, but the city of D.C. just let people run wild and take over places. It says the protest movement sparked by the brutal police murder of George Floyd. I think that is very, very highly suspect, at least the way that they framed it. Yeah, he was an unarmed black man, but that doesn't change the fact that you bring people into custody. Anyway, that sparked protests in over 20 countries. And here's the key. Workers and youth marched and demonstrated against racism, which has nothing to do with labor conditions at all. And no argument was even made. They don't even have to make the argument. So the question is this: why are they able to so quickly link racism, Palestine, any of these other sort of leftist causes? Why do they link it with Marxism right away? And I think the answer actually is coming from the Daily Signal. We're going to go there in just one second. First, I want to just say, if you guys want to sponsor the program, if you want to support the program, you can go to mypillow.com/Kyle. Again, mypillow.com/Kyle. I am on the regular guy. I refuse to pay for shipping if I don't have to. I'd rather wait. And in this internet age, I expect things to just pop at my door like tomorrow. It's going to be really good for me to move further out of civilization. My towels have not arrived from My Pillow, so I'm eagerly awaiting what they call bath sheets, the huge towels, because I'm in need of some new towels and they are inbound. I used my own promo code when I did so. Folks, you can use the promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E, promo code Kyle. 4 letters, saves you up to 50%. I think in my case, we saved like 30%. Knocked it down pretty good. Check out mypillow.com/Kyle if you guys are in the market for new bedding or for any of the various different tools out there. And thanks to Rose who always throws the links in the chat. I do appreciate that, Rose. It's very thoughtful. All right, here's where I think this goes. Like I said, Marxists, they're happy to find common cause with everybody. This is an interesting piece from the Daily Signal. This is written by a woman named Star Parker. I'm assuming a woman. That makes sense to me. The article says, no, demonstrations today are not like the 1960s. A lot of people have tried to make this parallel, that this is exactly like the American Civil Rights Movement. I know that the people that are in these protests like to fashion themselves as fighter for civil liberties and for civil rights, but they're not. And there's a really important undercurrent that is missing. It says the current demonstrations on college campuses against Israel remind some people of the unrest on college campuses in the 1960s. That famously ended pretty badly at places like Kent State. Not a real good thing, but the comparison is not a good one, says Parker. The unrest of the 1960s was defined by the war in Vietnam and by the civil rights movements. There is a moral justification that is in there that is missing right now. When you say there's a war over in Gaza and in Israel, is that not the same thing? People are not being treated well. The civil rights movement is really the big piece here, I think. They both had practical, personal impacts on young Americans in their own country. American soldiers were fighting and dying in Vietnam. There was a real life and death impact on all Americans, and specifically the youngest generation Americans. The military draft was operative, so on and so forth. The official number of American soldiers killed in Vietnam stands at 58,220. And although there were legitimate moral concerns about American involvement in the war, the moral concerns were accompanied by Americans having real skin in the game, which is a real possibility, by the way, if this continues on. Also, the civil rights movement had a real personal moral impact on all Americans. The youth are always highly sensitive to the moral failings of those around them. When properly tuned, young people will have a very strong sense of justice. My daughters are a great reminder to me of this, my young daughters. My 5-year-old knows very clearly when things are not fair. How many times do you remember that when you were a kid? It's not fair. And what is the job of adults? The job of adults is to temper your expectations of fundamental fairness. You have to know the world is not fair. So what is your job? Your job is to go out there and live in a way and model behavior that is more fair. That's what we do for our children if we're doing it right. Where does that fairness come from, though? This article continues on, talks about some of the reality of segregation and Jim Crows, but it says here, and this is the real key, I think, to this article, but also to our understanding of what we're looking at. In contrast to the woke activism of today, which is totally political in character, the movement, and they're saying the movement in the 1960s, was led by a charismatic and articulate black pastor and had a religious, moral tone that was rooted in Christianity. That's the big difference. It's the biggest difference right now. Today, it is a 100% political, that is to say leftist, that is to say a non-godly religion. I have a little piece that I did with Edify, the folks over at Catholic Vote. They did a nice little sort of PragerU style thing. It's my contention that leftism is a substitute religion. And I think these protests indicate the same. It's a substitute religion that has its own God. It's an imperfect God because it's the God of government. When all the good things flow from the government, why would you not consider that to be the thing that you worship? They have their own sacraments, do they not? Sacraments like abortion, climate paganism, chaining yourself to the ground, marching. These are all sacraments. Being arrested for the cause. And this isn't a cause where you're saying, listen, black people should be allowed to sit and have lunch at a lunch counter around white people. That seems like a moral good. It's rooted in a fundamental equity. You're talking about people that have no jobs, that are saying, give us dental dams so we can have oral sex in our crappy tents on a college campus that we don't even attend. We know that doesn't make any sense. There's a priesthood. These are government workers and the media that are the acolytes of it, that are out there pushing this message. Political leftism, by all accounts, including by the Title VII definition that the United States government uses to define religion, it would count as what we would call a sincerely held belief system. It doesn't have to make any sense. That's why Pastafarians are a real thing. If you guys have never heard of the Pastafarians, go look up the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. It's simply a joke. It's simply a hyperbolic proof that you can have completely illogical and nonsensical, theocratic ideas, and you can go out there and be protected in America. That's the whole point of our system. But the other thing is that they were also rooted in a nonviolence. The nonviolence comes from that Christian worldview, that we would accept suffering on ourselves in order to change the hearts of others. That's a Christ-focused idea. Does that mean that everybody in the civil rights movement was great and peaceful? No, of course not. But they showed that you actually triumphed over physical aggression by showing how evil it was, the contrast in the world. And that's not what's going on right now. These people are willing to take actual aggression. They're not passive aggressive. They're aggressive aggressive. Stepping into traffic like a Marxist speed bump, as I saw flying across in the chat earlier. Being a Marxist idiot who steps into traffic and stops people who are trying to get to work, that's problematic. There are better ways to do it. And by the way, the thing that you are supporting has nothing to do with the ideas. The people that are going out there and making the movements, they are not based in a unifying principle. That's why the civil rights movements were much more amenable to people that would otherwise not be persuaded. They'd be like, oh, you're a bunch of leftists. It's like, well, you're a bunch of leftists who also believe in the same thing that I believe. And you're showing me that what's going on in society is not living up to the value systems that I have. The civil rights movement challenged people to look at their own Christian faith and say, are we living up to it? Is it happening? And this country, whether you like it or not, is a Christian nation, at least by the majority. The numbers don't lie. That's why these young people who have no religion are looking out and saying, okay, communism is our jam. Marxism, they have a pretty name for it. I went to a website which is called Victims of Communism. I found this very interesting. This is a quote they had. And they talk about the 6 things that are required for all socialized or communist countries. How many of these start lining up? This is a quote from a political prisoner being held in Romania like 100 years ago. Because the collective took everything, all property, our house, our farm, everything became property of the state. Everything in your life, you had to do as they said to do it. The communists ordered everyone to think what they thought. There was no freedom of speech. There was no freedom of anything. If you said something the communists didn't like, you were arrested and sent to prison. There's a strong movement in this country of young people that feel this way. And like I said, you can go all the way back to the beginning of the first MayDay riots and the MayDay movement, which is the 1890s. But this is a little Wikipedia article. I typed in MayDay riots looking for something about Seattle in the early 2000s. And instead I got this thing about Cleveland in 1919, a series of violent demonstrations. It was in Cleveland, Ohio, an industrial city. The riots took place by a socialist organizer, Charles Ruthenberg. A group of unionists and socialists and communists and industrial workers of the world unite. They were all protesting against the conviction and American intervention in the Russian Civil War against the Bolsheviks. This is a piece that I found from this Victims of Communism. It says, these regimes possess 6 key characteristics. These are the characteristics I would argue that leftism has really co-opted. And this is why they've gone too far. The idea of liberalism is not tragic. It's a good foil to like overall the sort of the static position of conservatism. Liberalism and conservatism in conflict equals probably a pretty good outcome. That's why the American experiment has been okay. The political left and the right kind of hashing out their ideas and policy. That's not what happens when one moves too far. This article, I'm just reading off the screen here. It says, these regimes possess 6 key characteristics. Number 1, an official ideology. Number 2, a one-party authoritarian state. How much do they love that idea? Number 3, a monopoly on violence. That's the key. That's ownership of the police. That's why weaponization of our government is such a problem. Number 4, control of all information, mass media, including books and radio and television and movies and now the internet. Number 5, government planned and centrally controlled economy. Go look at the Green New Deal and some of these other ideas. And lastly, the use of Communist Party-controlled terroristic security services. That's the final implementation. When you have all monopoly on violence, then you can also have this sort of terroristic security service, which I would argue to you is our FBI at this point. Not because everybody in there is a terrorist, not because everybody in there is doing something that's evil. They don't even think they are. What I'm getting at is that it is the state-sanctioned arm, and it is weaponized. It is being run by a DOJ, and the DOJ is wholly captured. It's an ideology-captured organization, and they are the ones that have the monopoly on violence in this country. Really, really, really dangerous stuff. Super scary to me. I'm going to bring up Catholic Vote because we're going to talk about something that's out there that's going to sew some of this stuff together. If you guys want to support Catholic Vote, you can go to catholicvote.org. You'll notice in the show notes today that there is a link to the store.catholicvote.org. And that store is a place that you can actually buy this new book, which I think I have. Maybe I do. Did I grab it on the screen? I'm not sure if I put it on the screen. I didn't put it on the screen. There's a new book that's coming out. It's pre-order only right now. It's called For God, Country, and Sanity, How Catholics Can Save America, edited by my friend Brian Birch. I have a chapter in there that you guys might find very interesting. There are many other chapters as well. It's 13 different chapters from 13 different authors, all of whom have a Catholic worldview. I think that it will resonate with many of you. If you guys want to pre-order the book, it's not very expensive. It's like $16. And you can get a little taste on all this stuff. It's a lot of different people. I'll throw it on the screen tomorrow. You'll see. The cover's great. It just shows that Liberty and Lady Liberty, specifically the Statue of Liberty, is under assault by all these different groups, whether they be the woke types, whether they be the Marxist types, whether they be the all cops are bastards / anarchists. There's an awful lot of people out here that are taking shots at it because America is vulnerable, and America is vulnerable because it's lost that focus, like we talked about in the civil rights movement, of that Christian worldview. When you don't have principles, then you are susceptible to all kinds of nonsense. And this is one of those things. All right, I want to get deeper into this. You'll see why this relates. Like I said, Catholic Vote, one of our sponsors, but also the publisher of The Loop. This coming out of today's Loop, and I think it's worth our time to discuss. It says, a poll, over half of Americans concerned over reliability of election news coverage. Just real quick in the chat. Which half of America do you think is worried about election news coverage? Is it people on the political right or people on the political left that are worried that we're going to get bad coverage and it's going to be nonsensical? Because this would be an interesting test for you guys out there. Either put it in the comments, but you can also throw it in the chat right now. According to a new poll, over half of Americans are concerned about news sources that will report inaccurate information about the 2024 election cycle. Republicans are more likely to feel this way compared to Democrats. What do we think, y'all? Wow. Republicans are interested in getting closer to the truth with a capital T. Republicans don't want just feel-good news. 53% of Americans in total, so more than half, but not much more, say, quote, they are extremely or very concerned that news organizations will report inaccuracies or misinformation during the election. So saith the Associated Press on Wednesday of last week. Per the AP, 47% of the respondents expressed serious concerns that news outlets would report information that has not been confirmed or verified. Why would that be problematic, you think? Having unconfirmed reports. That would be called misinformation, by the way, by our government. Misinformation is things that is information that's wrong, but it's on accident. It's not in purpose. We didn't intend to mislead you, but we did because we reported something inaccurate. That's the claim. 47% are concerned about that. Do you know what's really interesting? One of the things that I exposed as a whistleblower that I had people come and share with me documents indicating the FBI's, what is it called? It's the Peace something or other. It's an organization out of headquarters that was looking at, it was part of the Election Crimes Task Force. They put out this pamphlet, this informational one sheet to agents, the people that have the guns, the people that have the monopoly on violence in this country, right? At least the legal monopoly. And that one sheet said that misinformation and disinformation are actually federal election crimes. That's false, by the way. But that's what happens when you have people that have an ideology, that have no background in constitutional law, do not even understand the requirements and what the agency is supposed to do, but they know that they're pushing that concentrated ideology forward, and they're willing to use the legal and state mandated means, which include violence, to be able to go out there and do that. By the way, if you could be arrested for misinformation, oh wait, we already did that in this country, didn't we? We had Douglas Mackey on here talking about how his meme, which was a joke, and obviously a joke, they referred to that as conspiracy against rights. Oh, weird, because we're actually prosecuting Donald Trump under the special counsel, under conspiracy against rights, something that's made up. Donald Trump is allowed to have ideas, even if they are wrong, and he is allowed to vocalize them like every other American. And he's allowed to take actions based on the belief that they are correct, even if it turns out that they are wrong later on. And we are now seeing that being prosecuted in this country. Over half of Americans are concerned about the reliability of election news coverage. Why would it be that people on the political left are not as worried about this sort of thing? Why are they not worried about inaccurate information? The people who apparently have the most trust in the news were 13% of Black adults, 9% of Hispanics, and 3% of whites. It's very weird. Have a great deal of confidence in the news that they obtain. Younger adults are less engaged in election news, and they also have less confidence in the media than the older people, but older people have more concerns about inaccurate information. Interesting. You mean like the older you are, the wiser you are, and the more wily you are, the more that you have life experience, the more likely you are to do what we talk about here? You know that you want to believe things, but you also trust no one. Maybe you grew up and watched the X-Files in the 90s like I did, and you know that that's the right answer. That is the right answer, by the way, for the left and the right. We're all on the same page here. We should all distrust the means of government that is pushing this information out because it can't be trusted. They've proven it. You want to know how? Check this weaponized craziness out. This is a report that I touched on the other day. I want to get deeper into it. We're going to probably run over the hour simply because of this story. This is coming from Mary Margaret Olohan, reporting exclusive conservative leaders are calling on DOJ's Kristen Clark to resign following the Daily Signal report. This came out on Friday afternoon. Now, conservative leaders are talking about the issue with this woman. Kristen Clark is the head of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. She's the one who set the policy of going after people for FACE Act violations, including Mark Haupt, who we've had on the show. She's the one that's been doing the setting the policy for prosecutions of pro-life activists that have been standing outside of abortion clinics that are not engaged in mostly peaceful protests. They're engaged in totally peaceful protests. And yet, she's not a real peaceful person from what we saw in there. Apparently to a 2006, she didn't talk about an arrest. When she was being nominated and confirmed in the Senate, Tom Cotton from Arkansas, 2021, asked her point blank, have you ever been arrested? And her answer was no. She said, no, I have not been arrested. She didn't disclose it. It was expunged. But being arrested is being arrested. Look, I was arrested when I was in the Air Force. I was arrested and I was thrown into a cell and I spent the night there. The end result of it was nothing. The end result was like a letter of reprimand. The same day that I got a letter of commendation from the same supervisor. The same NCO that wrote me a letter of reprimand also wrote me a letter of commendation on the same day. One for owning guns and having them locked up in a trailer that was like sitting behind concertina wire. And then the other was for performing above job duties and performing above rank for like 6 months and essentially doing his job. But I did get arrested and I did disclose it to the FBI on my background check because it happened. And there's paperwork that documents it in the same way that the FBI does a background check on every single political appointee that every single presidential administration comes in and puts out. Kristen Clark had one of those background checks. I would almost guarantee you that it came from a group called the Spin Squad, SPIN, out of Washington field office. I know people on that squad. I know a couple of people on that squad. They're usually like getting close to retirement and they're bored. And what do? They go out and conduct interviews. They do background checks on political appointees. That's the entirety of the Spin Squad. I don't know what it stands for, but it is an acronym of some kind, just like everything else. You know what's real weird? The Spin Squad is actually pretty good at what they do because they're not on any time limit. They have very seasoned, experienced folks that know how to do this kind of stuff. And what do? They go and they send leads all over the country. I've done interviews on this kind of stuff. We had a federal judge that was being nominated in our area, and I went out and did some interviews at family friends of hers or people that knew her as a child. That's what you do when you do a background check for a high political position like this. This woman, Kristen Clark, she definitely had a file created by the Spin Squad. Like I said, almost assuredly from Washington field office where I used to work. And it would have included an NCIC report showing that she was arrested in 2006 for stabbing her husband with a kitchen knife. A guy named Reginald Avery. Now, she claimed that he was domestically abusing her, that it was a self-defense, but she was arrested for it nonetheless. That's an arrest. When you don't tell people of your arrest and the fact that you've decided to defend yourself with a steak knife, maybe it was totally justified, maybe it wasn't. Shouldn't that have been something brought up in fairness? Shouldn't that have been part of the advice and consent part when they nominated her and she was confirmed to run the Civil Rights Division, having a violent stabbing in her history? Like I said, maybe she was righteous, but maybe she wasn't. And maybe it was a political move that dropped that thing off. A lot of weird things happen in households. We're seeing right now guys like Mike Glover facing a domestic violence charge. A lot of things happen in households that we can't understand. I don't jump into, I don't understand what went on with Steven Crowder. I don't get into that either. There's a lot of things that belong outside. There should be an apolitical organization. But if you can't trust your judiciary to do their job, which is say, yes, there was objectively paperwork saying this woman was arrested and she lied and said, no, I've never been arrested. You've now lied in front of Congress. Here's the real problem. Our FBI definitely had this information. I will assert there is zero possibility that they did not know that she was lying. Did they give that to Republicans? Did they have access to that? Did the DOJ just say, we're going to cover this thing up and we're going to paper over it? We're going to bury this information so that we can get our person in because we prefer to have Kristen Clark running this organization so she can run after Catholics that are pro-life? Captured ideology, folks. This is what weaponized government looks like. Real scary. Really, really weird. I don't like it. And I know for a fact, like that is the way that those organizations run. That is the way that those background checks happen. There's no chance they wouldn't have an NCIC. That's the most basic level check. And it would show it. It would show that there was a stabbing, that there was an arrest and what it was for. Even if the charges were dismissed, even if it was expunged, it would show up. So what other things are out there? Who else has been confirmed with background checks that were covered up by a DOJ? That the FBI maybe did their job, maybe decided to bury it in there. Like, I have to imagine the FBI agents don't care. Like, they don't. I didn't care when I went and did. In fact, the people you meet on these background interviews, they're really, really lovely. They're almost always very nice, even if they don't agree with anything you say politically. They're usually friendly. And why are we tolerating somebody in the Civil Rights Division of all places? Just because she's like a diversity hire doesn't mean she should sit there if she was lying about that. It feels like a big problem to me. All right, last thing I wanted to touch on was this piece about birth control. They were requesting it in the camps. Kind of an interesting thing to see an alignment with the folks. A lot of these movements, like I said, they've gone so far that they've actually internalized the problem that they said that they were going to fight against. There's a lot of talk right now about hormonal birth control, the so-called the pill. TikTok is deleting certain things, talking about the harms of hormonal contraceptives. Washington Post ran a cover article discussing it. There's this article from this woman named Katie Breckenridge. It's also covered in today's Loop. This is from AngelesNews.com. This is the particular article. Evidence mounts for why women should do away with, quote unquote, the pill. And there are people on the left and the right, and there are certainly a lot of women that are starting to reevaluate where this thing came from. Even the left-leaning feminist scholars are starting to ask these questions. It says, the pill has changed the view on what it means to be a female, the value of motherhood, and what kinds of health outcomes we're willing to accept for consequence-free sex. Well, either way, there's never consequence-free sex. There's always something that happens. There is some version of a psychological connection that happens. You can't get away from it unless you just break. But I found it very interesting that this article ties in that Margaret Sanger was one of the first people to really push the effort to eliminate poor people and mental illnesses and people who had disabilities by putting them on the pill. It was a chemical sterilization option. And here you go. From a left-leaning source like history.com, it says the first birth control pills used were on Puerto Rican women as guinea pigs. Go figure. Would you imagine that the political left would lionize the efforts of Puerto Rican women using birth control? But would you also feel like they'd want to cover up the fact that some of them died in the original experiments? Inovid was the first one that they were pushing out there. They had 3 women die during the testing phase of that drug. And they didn't investigate their deaths. They're just fine with it. So many of these quote unquote control mechanisms, whether it be birth control or gun control, I'm sure there's plenty of others, they all have these very racist, bizarre roots. It's coming from history.com. Sanger thought that women would never be free until they had the ability to control their own bodies, but her views on birth control were also rooted in philosophies that would raise modern eyebrows. That's a nice way of saying that. Historians contest a long-standing myth that Sanger thought non-white people should be prevented from procreating. Oh, that's a myth, apparently. But they do agree that Sanger supported eugenics, which is the same thing. Like I said, they're apologists. It's pretty many. A theory that quote-unquote undesirable populations could be reduced or eliminated by controlling their breeding. Yeah, Margaret Sanger was behind it. Just like she's behind like all the what do you call them? The abortion clinics that are hanging out there in black neighborhoods and other poor neighborhoods. Isn't that interesting? And we've got a black lady in charge of the Civil Rights Division that decided to go after Catholics who are protesting out in front of them and trying to make these women walking in there aware that the person that they are carrying is another unique human life and that is not God's plan for them. It's just interesting. It's just interesting to me when we loop together that these movements get co-opted by Marxists. The Marxists are godless by nature. They don't have a North Star. They don't have a objective sort of this is right, this is wrong, operational morality idea. And when you think that the ends justify the means, then maybe you're okay with a couple of Puerto Rican women dying and making sure that the people that are a little bit lesser on the socio-political scale don't breed. And maybe we should get rid of a lot more blacks in this country. Like, is that really the argument that we're going to be hearing? But these things all they come right out of one another. They lead one after another, and it almost always starts with a lack of God, and it ends with anybody that we don't like can be killed. And that doesn't matter whether they're unborn children, or whether they are women, or whether they are just people that are in the way politically. It's kind of scary stuff. Like I said, they're always Marxists at root, but that always comes back to this godless evil. Worth knowing where these movements start and where they end up. You guys, you can support a lot of your sort of red pill knowledge, if you will, by getting the Loop. You're going to get a lot more of this kind of stuff in the Loop from Catholic Vote. So I'll just plug them one more time. Let me also say, if you guys want to support my buddy, who is a objectively awesome human being, the O'Boyle family, and my friend Garrett O'Boyle, you can support the merch store by going to the-expendables.com. They are the opposite of the godless heathens. They are the opposite of these Marxists. They are capitalists, slinging t-shirts and other merch items, hats and pins and so on. Go to the-expendables.com. Use the promo code Kyle because you are also a capitalist. You want to save 10% on your own. 10% off using promo code KYLE, the-expendables.com. If you want to support the merch store, you can wear stuff like this one here. This is the new TKSS or Kyle Seraphin Show, the Kyle Seraphin Show shirt. It's got the badge. It's got the logo on the back. This one's in blue. I'm a big fan of the blue. I'm a big fan of the red. I like the OD green. I can't figure out which I like the most. I think the one that I like the least is the gray one, but it's also the one that shows up the best, so I don't hate it. And the black on black is really cool too. Anyway, check out their comfortable t-shirts. I'm wearing them every single day, so you guys know that's the uniform for the show, the-expendables.com, and support the merch program. Let's do a 5-star review before we get out of here. I did have some videos I showed. You know what? This is where this stuff goes. I'll just show you right now. This is where this goes right now. This was at a graduation at the University of Michigan. In the University of Michigan Theater and Music Department, a bunch of pro-Palestine people started marching through. If it doesn't make it in the theater graduation, all it tells me is that the older and the wiser, the sort of cagey parents that are paying for this stuff, they know. They know what's going on here. Let's try this one out real quick. Yeah, they're drowning out the pro-Palestine from the river to the sea crowd by just marching and calling out USA. That's at a theater graduation. You can imagine. By the way, it sounds really good to chant USA. It feels pretty good compared to hearing people doing some like Marxist nonsense. All right, I got one little taste, palate cleanser. We'll do that right after. Let's just do the 5-star review first. And there's 2 of them. I wanted to read them because they, for one time in history, things have all aligned. This is a very recent one. This is from Jaybird and Don Dowling. And they're both people who deliver packages for a living. Jaybird says, when I go on dates, I always tell them I work for the government. I'm a letter carrier for the USPS, and my job is more dangerous than an FBI agent. Jaybird, you've said that before. I've said it too. You know why? You're right. It is more dangerous to be a letter carrier, 100%, especially in some neighborhoods. And then Don Dowling saying, happy 300th anniversary, or 300th episode rather, TKSS, 5 stars. Your show has become a daily listen while I work. I'm a FedEx courier for 40 plus years now. I realize I missed some of the visuals here, but still a great show. We appreciate you listening and the 5-star review. You guys can leave your own if you want to do so on Apple. The show link is in there. If you're listening on Spotify, it'll prompt you for questions, comments, sarcastic remarks. Don't leave out the sarcastic remarks, especially if you're doing something that's more dangerous than an FBI agent. So we do appreciate all those as well. Let me throw a little fun video at you. I found this weekend. I think we're going to do a series of these. This guy's name is Tyler Champagne. I think I'm saying it correctly. He's on Instagram, which I hate, but I love this video because if you have a toddler and you are instructing them in the ways of the world, there is a phase when they don't digest your Christian values or any other values for that matter. They're just toddlers. And this guy has the Toddler Motivational Podcast, episode 1. This is the first taste of it. Sink into this for a moment. Just remember, break the mold. Mom, you're old. I'm the reason your coffee is cold.
I don't sleep at night. Sleep is for elderly people, like my parents in their 30s. When I'm sleeping, I'm not causing chaos, right? When I'm awake, I can continually cause chaos throughout the day. Concentric circumference. Want to know what I had for breakfast today? I licked 1 grape. That's all I need. I don't eat food. Food is a waste of time. When I'm chewing, when I'm swallowing, not causing chaos, okay? Licking a grape gives me enough energy to torment my parents for an entire morning. I don't swallow water, okay? Another waste of time. Time equals chaos. I hold water in my mouth for a little bit, and then I spit it on my shirt. I don't need to drink it to become hydrated. I took a 10-minute nap in the car today. That's all I need. My parents wanted me to nap longer. Guess what? At highway speeds, it's like napping. It's like 60 times the amount of sleep. It's like napping in dog years. Today, my mom tried to put my pants on the right way. And I was like, excuse me, miss. I don't subscribe to the traditional pants system. I'm a pockets on the front type of guy. Break the mold. Mom, you're old. I'm the reason your coffee's cold.
If you have a toddler, if you've raised a toddler, you know exactly what he's talking about, especially the hydration theory of just putting it in his mouth and then spitting it out. Why do kids do that stuff? Yeah, clearly this dude, Tyler, is raising a child that is on the Steve Friend diet of eat one almond. You start with lick a grape and you work your way up to one almond. Anyway, folks, make sure you are following the show over on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Make sure you've hit the like button, follow, subscribe if you are so inclined. If you want to vote on the music, make sure you're subscribed. Otherwise, we don't care what you think. We do, but we don't. We don't, do we? Again, thanks to the chat moderators for doing their jobs. You guys can see it scrolling across the screen. We'll see you again tomorrow for another Kyle Seraphin show. I'll say this. God bless you. Don't be a Marxist. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.